In an earlier video, I reviewed the RMC Takina 400mm f5.6 lens. It was a decent vintage lens for wildlife photography, which could be acquired for a reasonable price. Although I had some issues with the lens, specifically when it came to chromatic aberration. The lens I'm going to be reviewing today is a step up in terms of image quality, but also price. This is the Tamron SP 500mm f8 lens. Observing the lens, you'll find that it has a rather large 82mm front filter thread. This is while also noticing that it's unusually short for a telephoto lens. Without a lens cap, lens hood or lens adapter, and focus at infinity, it's just 87mm long. The included lens hood will almost double the lens's length, but it is also collapsible around the lens's body. There's an integrated tripod collar which can be rotated 360 degrees by loosening a short screw on its side. The tripod foot can also be removed by taking out 2 screws on either side. Taking a look around, you'll see that there is a rear filter that screws in behind the lens. This filter is of an unusual size, coming in at 30.5mm. Getting a 30.5mm filter for the rear is certainly going to be cheaper than buying an 82mm filter for the front, but I'm almost certain you'll never need to consider using the rear filter. Something important to note is that this lens is designed to use a rear filter, so even if you aren't intending to use any interesting filters, you'll need to keep the included normal filter installed. The rear also shows off the Adaptol 2 mount of this lens. The Adaptol mount was created by Tamron in the 70s, so they can make lenses which can be mounted on virtually any camera system. This is a great benefit, as you can mount the lens on basically any camera you've got, provided you have the right adapter. I have a Fujifilm X mount adapter, which set me back $20. Of course, any adapter will add to the length and weight of the lens. The focusing is smooth and well dampened. The lens also has a long focus throw of almost 360 degrees. This allows for precise focusing, which you'll definitely need as a lens like this has an extremely thin depth of field. The lens also doesn't feature an aperture ring. It has a fixed f8 aperture instead. This is a common weakness of mirror lenses, but is hardly a concern. If you really need to reduce the light coming in through the lens, you can just install a rear neutral density filter. Now, without getting into too much detail about how mirror lenses work, basically by using 2 mirrors and reflecting an image between them, you can manufacture a lens that is smaller and cheaper than a standard refractive lens. Mirror lenses are very popular amongst astronomers for precisely that reason. With photographers, that story is rather different. Although popular in the 70s and 80s, mirror lenses have fallen out of favour. The only current manufacturers of mirror lenses are Samyang and some assorted Chinese brands. The justification for this change is that mirror lenses have poor sharpness when compared to refractive lenses. They also have a strange ring-shaped bokeh that many people find distasteful. If you read internet forums, you get the impression that mirror lenses are as sharp as a sponge and not nearly as useful. So let's take a look at some of the pictures I've taken with this lens to see whether they're right. Alright, let's check out the image quality of this lens. Before I start, I'm going to put all these raw files I'm viewing here in the link in the description, so you'll be able to view them yourselves. But first things first, sharpness. Is this lens sharp? Well, let's take a look here. 100%. It's looking sharp to me. Let's look at another photo just to make sure. It's also looking sharp. Could we be mistaken? Let's check out this picture. That seems to look sharp. Well, what about this one? Well, yeah, that looks sharp. See, here's the thing. A lens like this is definitely sharp. A lot of people will say mirror lenses aren't sharp, and they're wrong. I think part of the problem has to do with how hard it is to nail focus with this lens. I'll go back to the first image to show you what I mean. If you look at the image, the focus is just about here. But the depth of field is so narrow that the beak is just out of focus. And then all the feathers along here are out of focus too. It's just this bit that's the field of focus, which is tiny. And imagine if you're trying to take pictures of small birds like this, you're going to have a very hard time getting focus. With this picture I was using my Fujifilm X-T2, which is really useful because it has an electronic viewfinder with focus magnification. But even then, it's pretty frustrating to take photos with the mirror lens when you're trying to nail focus. if you're using a DSLR, I wouldn't recommend using mirror lens at all, really. But it's definitely not unsharp. I can dispel that immediately. Next thing. Bokeh. You can look in the background of this picture here, the sort of weird donuts. And that's what people talk about when they talk about the mirror lens bokeh, the rings or the donuts. Take a look here. You don't really actually see the donuts in this photo, but they're sort of busy. It's not smooth at all. A better example is this one. You can see you got all these rings in the background, but all the leaves in the background too form these odd shapes with rather sharp edges, which isn't particularly pleasing. So people, when they talk about the ring bokeh and how they don't like it, you can certainly understand why. But at the same time, if you're shooting wildlife, I think you shouldn't be focusing the bokeh so much. One reason is if you look at photos like this, or photos like this, there's no background anyway, so you're not going to have to worry. Another thing is, take a photo like this. Again, there's no actual rings here, although it's a bit busy. But if you're looking at this photo, you're not really focusing on the background, are you? You're focusing on the bird. You're focusing on the subject, which is what's really most important in wildlife photography. So you shouldn't worry about the bokeh so much. And I don't have any photos here, but there's certainly some creative things you can do with donut bokeh, particularly when it comes to shooting on water, because you can get all the interesting shapes on the waves. But next thing you should notice is chromatic aberration. If you watch my video about the Takina 400mm, you'll see that the bokeh was horrible. Not necessarily because it was busy like this, it was because it was filled with aberrations. And then the subjects themselves also had aberrations. And that was easy to deal with in Photoshop, but usually I just end up converting all the photos there to black and white, so I don't have to spend an inordinate amount of time trying to fix the background. But here you can see, you've got a dark area here, a light area here, and there's just nothing. There's no chromatic aberration at all. Let's go to a different photo. Well, just go to any one of them. They won't have any aberrations, so you don't have to worry about that there. That's one good thing about mirror lenses. There's no aberrations at all. But contrast, that's another area people complain about with mirror lenses. Scroll down to this photo. You can see that I haven't actually done anything here. No adjustments at all, but you got good contrast, good saturation. A photo like this maybe is sort of low in contrast, boosted that a little bit. But generally, you won't have to do much to adjust the photos to get good contrast. I think you have to use the lens hood though. I just had it attached on all the time, which is how it should be used. Finally, before I go, I'll mention one other thing, and that's macro photography. This lens can focus down to a 1.7 meters, which is pretty good. It gives you 1:3 macro ratio, which sounds attractive. A 500mm lens with some decent macro capability is going to be fairly useful because you have very long working distance if you're shooting things like butterflies or insects or lizards that are going to be dissuaded by your presence. You can sit quite far back and take pictures of them, but I don't think I'd recommend it. If you look at a photo like this, it's not... The depth of field, again, is going to be very small, like it was in the other photos, but it's going to be worse because you're shooting at the minimum focus distance. It's not particularly sharp. I shot at 1/800th of a second. And you can't stop it down at all to get a deeper depth of field. So you're probably better off using something like a 200mm lens, getting a little bit deeper depth of field and going a bit closer to your subject. Having sorted that out, why the bad rap? I suspect it has something to do with the quality of lenses produced. Not all lenses are like the Tamron. In fact, most aren't. During the glut of mirror lenses of the 80s, and even up until today, you'll see that most mirror lenses are just cheap garbage. Since they're cheap, that's what people will get a hold of. Unfortunately, you get what you pay for. The cream of the mirror lens crop, like the Tamron and some others, like those made by Nikon or Zeiss, are fairly rare and high in price. The Tamron is basically the cheapest of the good mirror lenses. Here in Australia, you can get one from somewhere between $150 and $300, depending on the condition and the accessories included. This is going to be more expensive than the Tokina 400mm 5.6, but I'd much rather have the Tamron over the Tokina. It is lighter, sharper, suffers no chromatic aberration to speak of, has a closer minimum focusing distance, and uses a mount which can be adapted to any camera. So I'd definitely recommend this lens, even if it costs a little extra.